Hello, hello. This is Michelle Drew here, your host on this interview today. And I'm here humbly with Jen Gaspar, who is a dedicated mom who suffered the loss of her beloved son, Nick. And I know that I'm going to have a hard time getting through this interview, but it's real and it's good. So Nick had a 2-year battle, which he did not win. And welcome, Jen. I am so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
So please tell us about Nick. Let's give him some space here and honor
Yeah,
him. Take us back and introduce us to Nick.
sure. So Nick is a twin. His brother is Jordan, and so they were my first. And they were both just really easy, despite being twins. Everyone always asks about what it's like to have twins, and I didn't know any different, but they were just so easy, and they were just really good babies. And growing up, they were best of friends. Nick, he was always very funny, quiet, loved school, had great friends. He loved his little sister. They actually shared a really close bond. Nick never cared.
Thing between him and your husband, right?
The what?
The sports thing back and forth where he like North Carolina.
Yeah, so he was a big UNC fan, and my husband's a big Duke fan, and those two are not supposed to, definitely not supposed to live under the same roof, but I kind of always stayed neutral. He never cared what anyone thought of him. He just did his thing and was always happy. He loved sports. He finally narrowed it down to basketball and lacrosse. He kind of tried out everything. Baseball definitely wasn't his thing, or soccer. He loved playing basketball. Him and his brother, they'd be out in the driveway all the time. Then the fights would start, but we had cameras, so we would know who, started which fight. He was just a really, really good kid.
Yeah, good soul.
Very good soul, very old soul. Very compassionate.
Yeah. So bring us to May of 2021, when things kind of took a turn and you got some devastating news. So I guess it wasn't devastating just yet, right?
Right. Yeah. So in May of 2021, nothing, Nick didn't have your typical symptoms that would ever kind of, scream, bring him to the hospital, he's sick or anything like that. He actually, it was Mother's Day, and he had, just so happens, had a lacrosse game, then a basketball game. And at the lacrosse game, I just noticed he was a little off, but didn't think too much of it. Then we went to basketball, still very off. He really had no affect when you were talking to him. You would say, "What's wrong?" And everything was like, "I'm fine, I'm fine." Not like him at all, but I really couldn't figure it out. And, I remember he really didn't want to, be out with his friends. They would go out ride bikes all the time. And I thought maybe something was happening at school. So I got in touch with the counselor at school right away. I've never even had to deal with anyone at school because they, never did anything wrong, never had any issues. They had got in touch with me right away. They weren't noticing anything at the time, but they were going to keep an eye on it. And then later that week, he went on a bike ride with his brother, and his best friend. And his brother called me and said that he fell off his bike twice at that point, which is was really weird. I mean, he was 14 years old. He was out on a bike all the time. So my husband went to pick him up, brought him home. He actually had an injury to his hip from lacrosse prior to this. So he had been going to PT, and we had a friend coming over who's a physical therapist who was going to just take an extra look at him, just to kind of make sure he was doing the right things. And she had come over, and when we were sitting at dinner that night, he was eating chicken, and we were talking to him and noticed he had a mouthful of food, and which was odd. So I'm like, you have all this food in your mouth, you're not swallowing it. So there was that. He had corn on the cob and it fell out of his hands. He couldn't hold it. And she had taken a look at him, and, physically at that point, he seemed fine. And another issue that he was having throughout that entire week was he was unable to get up for school. He was extremely tired. He was always the first up in the morning on his own. And it was a real struggle getting him to wake up for school. And, finally it got to the point where it was a Thursday. And that night I said, I'm going to set your alarm and put it across the room. And so I just assumed he was being, your typical teenager and
right.
not wanting to get up. And so my husband and I decided, let's just see if he gets up and where the morning is going to go. Let's just not drag him out of bed, and maybe we'll call the doctor. Because I did actually also have a meeting with my pediatrician earlier in the week, thinking maybe he was depressed about something. It was just all very odd, but again, nothing that would ever make you say, let's take him to the doctor. So he never got up that morning. The alarms went off. I think I set like 14 of them. And we noticed that his hand was trembling. His left hand had a tremor, which was very odd. And I decided to call the pediatrician, and they wanted to see him. So my husband actually brought him there, and they sent him straight to Children's Hospital, where I met them. And at that point, I was thinking maybe there's some sort of infection. I was starting to think like maybe this is something neurological, but again, Lyme disease maybe. A brain tumor never crossed my mind. And then some of the doctors were doing neuro exams, and they had mentioned a tumor, but still, not registering.
Yeah.
And he probably didn't get into an MRI until maybe midnight at that point. And they just put my husband and I in a room on a floor that was closed at the time and by ourselves. We had no idea what was going on. He was probably in there for over 2 hours.
Wow.
And when they got out, they had told us that they found a brain tumor.
Yeah. And it was a rare type of tumor, right?
Yeah, so he had some fluid buildup at that point. So a couple days after he was diagnosed with just the brain tumor, he went in for a biopsy and a ETV, which is a temporary drain. He was put on lots of steroids in hopes that some of his symptoms would start to get better. He had some short-term memory loss. Eventually, he was unable to walk at that point. And when the biopsy came back, he was diagnosed with a mixed germ cell tumor, which part of it is cancerous and part of it is not. It's a very confusing tumor, and it's extremely rare, especially in the brain. And typically it happens at birth, in utero. And once you hit puberty is typically when this tumor starts to really expand. And so, the best case scenario at the time would have been that tumor was all cancer, because then the chemo would have done its job. And they're very responsive to chemo. So in the beginning, we got a really great chance, of survival and remission. And he started the chemo. He was going to have 6 rounds. And then the plan was radiation after that. But once we got to, I think we were about 2 rounds in, and he had another MRI, and he was then diagnosed with growing teratoma syndrome, which meant the chemo wasn't working. The tumor was expanding rapidly. And we then had to make the decision to remove the tumor, which was extremely risky.
Yeah. And what a horrible decision for a parent to have to make.
Right.
That's, I mean, a diagnosis like that affects the entire family. There's one person physically going through it, but wow, so much.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can't say enough great things about everyone at Children's, especially his surgeon. She was just amazing. I went in there thinking, okay, 50% would be great. Like, let's just hope for that. I don't know what will happen after, but if we could just get 50%, because, they kind of went in there, it's in a really risky spot. Obviously it's the brain, anything could happen. And when they came out, they told us they got 100% of his tumor out, which was amazing at the time. And it took a weight off our shoulders for a long time. And I shouldn't say a long time, but a little bit.
For a little bit.
Yeah. So, he continued. They wanted him to finish up the chemo. He then went to proton radiation, which did a number on him. That really took a toll on his body.
Wow.
And then he finished, he rang the bell, we celebrated, and he then went to his 6-week post radiation MRI. And that's where they found a lesion on his spine and a few in his brain. And he went through another surgery. And, from there, it was then turned into a different type of germ cell, which is a yolk sac, a little bit trickier to cure. We decided to do a different type of chemo and then hopefully get him to an autologous stem cell transplant, which is his own stem cells.
Right.
And we got to that. And so we spent a month at Children's Hospital in December. And he came home on New Year's of 2023. And during this, we had gone for second opinions. We went to Seattle. Actually, we did not get to Seattle. I'm sorry. We went to Philadelphia. And then once we found out that the transplant didn't work, we found a trial. He went on immunotherapy for the time being in order to get us to this trial. And the trial was in Seattle, and it was for CAR T-cell therapy. Unfortunately, we didn't get that far. He then ended up in the hospital again, unable to walk, and things kind of went downhill from there.
Now, through all of this nightmare, it sounds to me like he kept his spirit. I mean, his quote that I read on your foundation website, sometimes life is hard, but that isn't an excuse to give up. Holy cow, from a teenager.
Yeah, he was not your typical, teenager at all. Especially being a boy, they're usually very shut down, quiet. But yeah, the kid, he never once complained. He just fought till the end and never gave up. I asked him one time, why are you not mad? How come you don't get mad? Because I was mad.
Right.
And he said, what's the point in getting mad? It's not going to change anything. And I think, coming from a 14-year-old at the time, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
And he loved making everyone else smile. Like he would go up to people in the hospital when we were there, and he was always complimenting the nurses, and he'd make sure he, went over to the parking attendants and made sure he would fist bump them and tell them to have a good day. And
Wow.
the nurses loved him.
I'll bet. I'll bet.
You know, he he was great. So he made light of it. It was obviously the worst time of my life. And, those days spent with him, he made me smile all the time. You
So
kind of
special.
started to forget about what was really happening because he just
Yeah.
always made light of what was happening.
Yeah. And I know that you have taken like this podcast series or whatever is from a mess to a message. And I know you've taken that messy part in your life and you have brought it forward to honor Nick moving forward in the years to come. So talk to us about your foundation. And I know you had, was it 18 people run the marathon in his honor?
No, not 18. That was
No.
it. That's one of his numbers though.
Oh.
And his birthday. So there were 5 of us.
Okay.
And so myself and one of my best friends, we ran for Boston Children's Hospital. My sister-in-law and another good friend ran for our foundation because we were lucky enough to get some bids. And one of Nick's favorite nurses, who my entire family loves, she ran for Dana-Farber in Nick's memory.
Wow.
So
That's incredible. And you guys are not runners, right?
I mean, I guess we are now.
You are now. You're marathon
we
runners now.
Run for, just to kind of stay in shape and that type of stuff, but I've never done a marathon before.
Wow. That's
So.
amazing. And your foundation, I know that I looked yesterday and I'm a golfer. I'm not a good golfer, but I'm a golfer. And I'm like, darn it, I missed out on doing a golf tournament, but I'll keep tabs on that for next year.
Yes.
Talk about the foundation and what kind of work the foundation is doing in honor of Nick's name and his memory.
Yeah. So, in the end, Nick's kind of final days, my family, my husband and I and our kids, we all lived at Boston Children's Hospital with Nick for 2 straight weeks. And, we never left his side. And during that, we decided to start a foundation. So we kind of got to work right away.
Wow.
And, so many people helped us that I couldn't just sit back and not do the same. Number one, we obviously want to find a cure. We want to raise more awareness for what Nick had. We were lucky enough to be pointed in the right direction. And, my husband and I went and visited this research lab and met with this doctor who is doing research on germ cell tumors. And, we're excited that we have partnered with them and we're going to help fund their research. So there's that part of it. And then, we fund any pediatric cancer research that we can. And just helping families, it doesn't matter what type of cancer they're going through, but, unfortunately, there's a lot that we're now aware of and weren't before. And a lot of them are very local. And, we don't ask questions. We kind of just send a check and they can use for whatever financial needs they need it for. And if we find out a little bit about the kids, we'll send them gifts and their siblings gifts too to open up. But just so many people did that for us. So it's great to give back. And just hosting all of these fundraisers in Nick's memory is really what keeps me going. I find it extremely therapeutic. And I think the best part for me is just keeping his memory alive and constantly talking about him. I think sometimes people are afraid to ask, and I have no problem, obviously, as of right now, talking about Nick, and I love talking about him. And, I won't ever forget him, and I don't want other people to. So
Right. Right. And do you ever feel his presence?
I do, I do. So one of my signs has been a cardinal, and it just so happens every single time I'm out for a run, I have a cardinal. Or maybe the other day I had five, and I wasn't
Wow.
even out for that long, and they just fly right by me. And yeah, so that's been one of my signs. And this has especially been a tough month, I think. Just
Because it's
being
the
May and
1 year. Yeah.
yeah, and you're constantly replaying every single minute back, and you remember each day and what happened that day.
Yeah.
And you know, it's hard, but I think, you have your other kids here too, and
And how's
that kind of
Jordan
also
doing?
keeps.
Where they were twins, how is he doing?
Um, he's doing okay. He's, your typical 17-year-old, doesn't really want to talk about things,
Yeah.
but he's okay at the moment, going to school, staying active.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I did notice in the pictures that Nick wore a cross.
he
So
did.
he found comfort in his faith. Is that
Yeah,
fair to say?
he ended up developing a really strong faith during his diagnosis. And I can't say that it came from me. Um, he probably helped me more through all of it with that. But yeah, he did. And he wore that cross every day. And he taught, I think, a lot of us about, just having that faith.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything that I have not touched on or that we have not explored that could honor Nick's memory and his short journey here on this planet?
Um, I don't think so. One thing that I've learned is I have completely different outlook on life, I think. And don't sweat the small things is one of them. You hear a lot of people complaining, and I also still complain about certain things, but then I also have that, it's really not that big of a deal.
Right. Right.
So yeah, I think if I could tell anyone, something, it would definitely be, there's worse things that could happen. And unfortunately, we are living that.
Right. Right. Exactly. Now, where can people find the foundation so that they can be a support to what you're doing?
Yeah, so nickstrongfoundation.com. We have our own website, and we pretty much every month we put out a newsletter, and we tell people what we've done that month, what's upcoming events, and a little bit about Nick's story. If anyone knows of anyone, a family that could maybe use some help, if you just click on the contact page, and you could put the person's name, their address, a little bit about them and their story, and we usually respond to everyone and send something. So
Wow, that's so special. Well, Jen, thank you so much. You touched me, and I'm not going to do it again. You touched me with that story, and I think that the ripple effect of this is going to be huge. And I thank you for what you're doing and
thank
taking
you.
that messy time in your life and really pushing it forward in a beautiful message. So
Thank you.
thank you.